Hi, welcome back for part 7 in our series working through Romans chapter 8. Last time we were thinking about the fact that we live this Christian life, this new life, still in an old world, in a world that groans, in a world that we groan with our own suffering, and we groan with grief and anguish for the suffering that we see around us in our world. And the Holy Spirit groans within us. He helps us in that groaning prayer as we cry out for our world, as we cry out for ourselves. And that's the world in which we live. That's the world in which, although we're born again, we're justified, we're saved by faith, we've got a new life, we're a new creation. Nevertheless, we live that life out in bodies that are still going to die, and in a world that's in bondage to decay. And just where Paul says about our world being subject to frustration, the Greek word that he uses there is the same Greek word that the Greek Old Testament used to translate the Hebrew word in Ecclesiastes that our English version translates as meaningless. That our whole creation has lost its meaning and its purpose, that it's not functioning in the way that it should. And that's the world in which we live. But there's some good news in that world. There are two things we need to know. What's interesting is that Paul uses this word about what we know 3 times in this little section. He admits that sometimes we don't know what we ought to pray or how to pray, and that's why the Holy Spirit helps us. But we do know, first of all, and we need to know this and grapple with this, we do know about this groaning. Verse 22, we know that the whole creation is groaning. We need to know that, and we do know that, and we can't escape that. But then verse 28, perhaps one of the best known verses in the New Testament after John 3:16, there's something else that we need to know. That as well as we know about the groaning, we also know that in all things God works for the good of those who love him. In all things, God works for the good of those who love him. And it's really important that as well as knowing about the groaning, that you know about this. As well as knowing how rough and tough this world is, if we only know that, we're going to struggle. But we need to know this that's in verse 28, that God is at work in all things for good. We need to strand this out carefully because I think this verse can be taken wrongly. I've seen it taken to mean that everything happens for a reason. That everything that happens to you as a Christian is sent by God for your good in some way. Personally, I've got to say I don't believe that. I don't believe God is running the universe in that way. I don't believe that he's organising everything that happens. If he was, why would it be called meaningless? Why would it be called frustrated? Why would it be called bondage to decay? I believe there are many things that happen that simply have not crossed God's desk. That he allows the laws of physics and chemistry and biology and the free will of the creatures that he's made to have their outworking in our universe. That's my own take on things and the take of many others. And therefore, it's not the case that everything happens for a reason or that everything is organised and sent by God in my life. Things happen in my life because of the free will of others, because of the free will decisions that I make, and because of the randomness and meaninglessness of the way in which the laws of physics and chemistry and biology in our world happen. So coronavirus, I might get it. You might get it. Is that anything to do with God? Personally, I think not. And when Paul says all things in this verse here, I understand him to be referring back to what he's just been talking about, those frustrating things, those meaningless things, those things that are in bondage to decay, those things that are part of our fallen world, those things that we suffer in all things. It's not a new subject, this verse, although there's a break in the NIV and a little title in there that says more than conquerors, but Paul didn't put that in. Paul's still thinking about what he's just said, in all things, in this groaning, in this world of pain and suffering and grief and frustration and meaninglessness, in all those things. What do we need to know? Well, we need to know that God is at work. That God is not oblivious to it. He is at work on behalf of those who love him. He is working so that those things can work for our good. And we've got to get this in the right context. Does that mean that if I get coronavirus, it's good? No, it's bad. Does that mean that if I get coronavirus, God sent that? No, I don't think that's what this means. What it does mean is that in all things, even in bad things, and we've got to be able to call bad things, otherwise we end up talking nonsense. We've got to be able to call pain, pain, and death, death, and say that those things are bad, and the Bible does that. But in all things, God works for our good. If I get ill, God will be at work for my good. God will be at work, and if I choose to partner with him in that, then good things can come out of that. There isn't anything in our Christian life that if we will partner with God, that he cannot bring something good out of. There isn't anything that the master claymaker cannot take and shape for our good if we will work with him. Well, much of it depends on our reaction. Somebody once said life is 10% what happens to you and 90% how you react. If we will react with faith, not that blind faith that says, oh, God sent this, I'll just accept it. That's called Stoicism. That's what the ancient Greeks were into. They believed that everything that happened to them, the Stoics, had been sent by God, and one must just passively accept it. That's not how Jesus treats the storm on the lake. He fights back. He tells it to be quiet. There are some things in life that we need to fight back against, to pray against, not just to stoically accept. But the promise here is that in all things, whatever they are, God can work to bring good out of them if we will pray, if we will trust. As I say, that trust is about trusting that God can do something, not just passively saying, oh, God must have wanted this to happen. God, I remember once somebody, this is in another church a long time ago, so it's nobody that you will know, and it's somebody who's now passed away. But I'm not breaking any confidences here, but they'd lost a child. How painful and difficult is that? And I remember them saying to me that they'd coped with this by saying that God must have wanted some more children to be in heaven. And that's not what this verse is saying. It's not saying that God sends everything for some good reason. What it's saying is that bad things happen, but in those things, God can draw near, God can work, God can shape our character, God can use us to comfort others, God can bring all sorts of good things out of pain. But the pain is still pain, and the thing itself is still often decay and frustration and a bad thing. And we've got to learn to keep these things in separation. Otherwise, we'll end up trying to read God into everything. You know, if you run the lawnmower over your foot, you'll say, God must want me to witness to the nurse in A&E. No, you were just stupid. You ran the lawnmower over your foot. You know, God wasn't in that. It didn't cross his desk. He didn't have to think, should I permit this or not? No, it was just Bentley being stupid, ran the lawnmower over his foot. We live in a world where rubbish happens, where stupid things happen, where frustrating and terrible things happen. But in all things, God will work for our good. And you may well get a chance to witness to the nurse at A&E. And so when pain comes and suffering comes and death comes, we've got to turn our face towards God and trust that he is with us and alongside us, and say to him, Lord, how can you and I work together? How can I react to this so that good can come out of it? I give this to you, Lord. I don't passively accept it. I want to fight back against bad things. But I want to trust that in those things, nothing escapes God's ability to reconstruct our life and to bring good out of evil. That's what this verse promises. That's what we need to know for sure in this world where we also know there's a lot of groaning and where we sometimes don't know what to pray. But let's do know for sure that God is at work, always. For those who love him, this verse promise doesn't apply to everybody. It says to those who love him. But for those who love him, he is always at work for your good in the very worst of times to bring glory out of suffering.